Hello, and welcome to this, our 43rd live stream, where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. And today we are just going to take your questions, and without much fanfare, as always, super chats have priority. If you're not going to do a super chat, please prefix your question with a Q and a colon. We try to get as many non-super chats in as we can. We ask that you only ask your question once. And if you're going to do a something related to, say, a Bible verse or, say, a foreign word, please let me know what you think that verse is or what that word means, so I have a little bit of context to go on. So with that said, let's get into the question. We actually don't have a lot of super chats, so we are actually going to start, I think, with a super chat, because then we can get into the non-super chats, of which we got a lot. So load up Twidget. Okay. Okay. Our first super chat is from Cataphract3. Get Twidget up here. Let's see how far back this goes. So select that. Okay, awesome. Okay. Cataphract3 gave us a super chat for $5. Thank you very much. What is the ancient Near Eastern context for the Sabbath, and do you think it should be practiced in the church today? Okay. The ancient Near Eastern context of the Sabbath orients around the whole idea of the week. It is actually something that we find that's new with the Israelites coming out of Egypt. The Egyptians had a 10-day work week and only half a day off. So in ancient Egypt, you worked 9.5 days and you got a half day off. Okay? So frankly, everyone was working every day, practically. So there was no rest. There was no rest. So when the Israelites come out of Egypt, they're developing this way of explaining the world through Yahweh as creator. And they use the 6 days of creation and the seventh day where God rested from it as being sort of a model that should apply to the work week for the ancient Israelites. And this is really our earliest indication of, say, a Sabbath, is actually at Mount Sinai. So we don't find a lot of other ancient Near context for a Sabbath outside of that. At least I haven't discovered it yet. There might be. But that's the earliest I've been able to see is Mount Sinai for the concept of a Sabbath. Or even for that shortened work week, that whole sort of 7-day work week. So there's not much more to say about that as far as its context, but it does seem to be based upon the creation myth that the Israelites sort of believed in as they were coming out of Egypt. Now, the second part of your question, should it still be practiced in the church? And I'm going to answer it this way. I think it should be practiced. I don't think it must be practiced. Okay? I'm going to be very, very nuanced about this. I think it's a really, really good idea to practice the Sabbath. I think it's very healthy to practice the Sabbath. But we also need to recognize in modern church theology that Christ is the fulfillment of the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is the commandment that sort of is the catch bucket of the entire ceremonial law. So when Christ provided for himself as a sacrifice, it covered every aspect of the ceremonial law, including the Sabbath itself. You know, Christ is famous for saying, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And Christ said, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. Okay? And that he is the fulfillment of the Sabbath. So with that said, the onerous burdens of the Sabbath are no longer on us. But that doesn't uh, that doesn't negate the beneficial aspects of the Sabbath, which is it's not good to be working all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Physician, heal thyself. Do as I say, don't do as I do. Okay. I mean, I'm terrible about being a workaholic. I'm absolutely. I mean, I'll work all the time given my druthers. So it's like I have to sort of really sort of almost force myself to take a Sabbath because I have this constant compulsion to work. So, and part of it is I do really enjoy my work, which makes it even worse. It's even worse when you enjoy it. So, a rest is necessary. Taking a day off every week is necessary. Does the Lord care what day of the week it is? No. No. If your Sabbath is a Wednesday, fantastic, that works. If your Sabbath is a Sunday, that works too. It's not really so much that that any particular day of the week is sacred. It's more that taking a day off in faith to the Lord is good for you. It's good for you. So that's my opinion on this. It is interesting because we do see, I mean, this is a radical departure from the Egyptian work week. You know, there's no reason why the Israelites couldn't have just continued with the Egyptian work week. I mean, it made sense. You had, every month was broken down, every month was 30 days, broken down into 3 weeks of 10 days. Very logical. It's a very, very logical work week. Very, very logical month. You never had to wonder when the first day of the week was. It always fell on the same day of the week, you know, or when the first of the month was. You know, it's a very logical system, but it doesn't provide you with a lot of rest. And all levels of people in Egyptian society were working that work week. So, you know, it didn't matter if you were the vizier, didn't matter if you were a slave. You worked that entire week. The other thing that's really interesting about the Sabbath law, too, is that it applies to slaves. Slaves got a Sabbath rest. Your donkey got a Sabbath rest. It applied to everyone in your household. So you couldn't sort of wiggle your way around it. Oh, I'm not working this Sabbath, but my slave is instead. That didn't work for the Sabbath law. Everybody in Israel had to take it. So, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, very few societies would have even allowed this for a slave. It just wouldn't have been allowed for a servant or a slave. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and I just saw a second super chat in here as well. And then we'll get to the non-super chats from Kwame Adu 007 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. I'd like to know what you think of Betalk's late date for the Exodus in the 12th century BC. Okay. I don't think it's quite that late, but it's close. It's close. And he does think it is the people leaving Avaris. Now, what Betalk is trying to do here is he's trying to sort of push a middle ground here between the termination of occupation at Avaris that dates to roughly the 13th century with, say, earlier conquest narratives in, say, Canaan. For a long time, Betalk really liked the, say, the memorial view of the Hyksos being the where the Israelite legend came from. So his views are changing over time. But I think 12th century is a little late. I know Gary Rensburg likes that view. He likes the 12th century view. I think it's just a little on the late side. But I also think too that, frankly, Beatuk's view isn't that far away from my own view. It's only off by about 50, 70 years. So it's not that far away from what other late daters would do. So it's not screwball crazy, but it's a little later than the rest of us would probably take, and he would probably be more in line with, say, a view that sort of pushes an Exodus view that closer pushes to Merneptah with a very, very short sojourn. You really can't get away from the whole Merneptah Stela identification of Israel in Canaan. He's not gonna go any later than that. He's just not gonna go any later than that. I know Rensburg does, but Beatuk won't. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I did see another super chat. So what we are going to do instead is we are going to take our initial non-super chats, so we do not ignore them. Okay, so our first non-super chat is from Dian Selzar. I watched Vsauce video on ontology. Does the Bible heavily imply an ontology, biblical reality that interprets reality, objects, and concepts differently than science does in the eyes of God? Now, the eyes of God here is a dangling preposition. So I think I know what you mean here, but this question could mean two different things. I think the only thing that the Bible is really proposing here is it's proposing a view of gods and divinity and of magic, whereas science is doing what's sometimes called naive scientific empiricism, which is whatever you observe, that's reality. I don't think that's tenable. I don't think a magical view is also tenable, but naive scientific naturalism is definitely not tenable. And frankly, hundreds of years, the philosophy of science has kind of shown the deficits of that view. So we have to be very, very careful when we actually kind of come down to asking, what do we mean by the ontology of biblical reality versus, say, the ontology of scientific naturalism? Because they're different, and they come from different mindsets and different philosophical frameworks. And ontology means the beginning of things, okay? An ontology of biblical reality is going to be, say, sort of start with the idea of the pre-existence of God, and then sort of move forward from there into a created order. And a created order based upon, say, religious constructs, such as definitions of temples and a sacred space. Concepts of scientific, naive scientific naturalism are going to just start with whatever we see, whatever we experience, that's real. Okay? So it's going to basically say that whatever we start with, those sensible qualities as defined by empiricism are what is real. You see red, red is real. That's naive scientific naturalism. The problem is, of course, we now know that red is actually a construct in the mind. Because when we see red with our eyes, it's not objectively red. It's a wavelength of light, and frankly, a longer wavelength of light. And by moving that wavelength, it changes to a different color. a photon of red light hitting something else isn't creating necessarily the sensible quality of red. We have to interpret that as red. So, naive scientific naturalism has been under attack for the last 200 years since it was proposed by John Locke. But at the same time, too, it's useful. It has its uses. I mean, a lot of good philosophies have their uses, even though we know they're inherently wrong. So with that said, I don't think we can really come down one side or the other on this. And a lot of work has been done in this in the last 50 years. I know a lot of work has been done in philosophy of science. I haven't kept up on any of it. I've got too much other stuff to read. So I'm aware that work exists. I haven't read it myself. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Interesting question. A little out of my field though, but that's what I know about it. Right, and we got a second non-super chat here from Jacob Testa. Hi, Dr. Falk. I heard somebody claim that the Exodus couldn't have happened because during the New Kingdom, Canaan was under Egyptian control. So when the Israelites have just gone into more Egypt. Well, there's a lot of ways to define control. Egypt was not an empire. Okay, so it wasn't controlling every aspect of Levant. You know, you went into the Levant, it was not Egypt. Egypt was a hegemony. Okay? And we know this from the Amarna letters. We know this from the structure of, say, Egyptian garrison towns. Like, for example, one of the largest Egyptian garrison towns in Canaan was Beit Shean. That had 1,000 people living there. Half of them might have been soldiers. Quarter of them, half of that might have been chariots, so maybe 200 chariots. 250 soldiers. The rest of them were bureaucrats and support people. Most of the garrison towns in the late New Kingdom were more of observation posts. They were administrative centers. They were basically places to collect tribute. Egypt did not have a iron grip on Canaan, as much as it's sort of tempting to think that. So, we also know, too, that, say, at the end of, and I think there was another question to this regard, which we might just dovetail here if I see it. Did I see it here? Yeah, let's just dovetail this question on it as well, because that will also fill out the answer here. And this is ex-femboy saved by Jesus' question here. And his question is, if Ramses II is pharaoh of the Exodus and he lost his chariots, are there any records of Egypt being attacked afterwards? Shouldn't such a disaster to Egypt provoke a response? Okay, now we'll get to the fullness of that question, but let's move up the timeline here. I mean, we got the Amarna letters. We got the Amarna letters from the 14th century. And actually what I'll do here is I'll put on both questions and just drag the other one down so both are on the screen here. Okay, so we have in the Amarna letters, which date to the 14th century, during the reign of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Smenkhare, that Canaan was essentially a collection of squabbling city-states, with a few administrative centers that these squabbling states confessed their vassalage to. So these were vassal states. But they weren't under absolute control by the Egyptians. They could feud all the time and did feud all the time, and Egypt didn't get involved. So when we come to, say, the reign of Ramses II, we see something kind of remarkable happen. And we're always seeing signs of this in the Amarna period, but During the reign of Ramses II, we really start to see this, which is Egypt loses control of the Levant. Now, not immediately, and not all at once, but already in the reign of Ramses II, Philistines are starting to take over the coastal plain. They're overthrowing vassal states and putting their own people in there. One of the most interesting things I see, scholars, when they say, well, the Israelites couldn't have invaded Canaan during, say, the reign of King Merneptah, because Egypt had this iron grip control over the Levant. Oh, but those Philistines, they were just overrunning the coastal plain. Well, Egypt had more control over the coastal plain than the Judean foothills. There was actually Egypt, when Egypt went on campaign into Levant, it almost always went up the coastal plain. It almost never went into the Judean foothills, and it certainly didn't do it from the south. When Egypt attacked, say, the Judean foothills, it typically went up the coastal plain through the valley of Jezreel and then came back down. And that's because there was a swamp between the coastal plain and the Judean foothills, so that made crossing by chariot quite difficult. So what we have in, say, the hegemony of the late early Ramesside period is that there's still some garrison states. These garrison towns cannot enforce the hegemony. They can just observe, they can collect tribute, they can provide support operations should Egypt do a campaign, but almost all enforcement was done by campaigns. Now, in the case of Ramses II, he didn't provide another enforcement campaign after his 18th regnal year. So then, that answers, say, Jacob Testa's question about, how could the Israelites enter in? It's because they'd already lost control over the coastal plain to the Philistines. And they no longer had the power to really enforce other countries coming in and occupying. So that answers that question. Now, to answer the other half of Ex Femboy Saved by Jesus' question, which is, shouldn't, if the Pharaoh of Egypt had lost all his chariots, are there any records of Egypt being attacked afterwards? Shouldn't such a disaster provoke a response? And the answer is no. The reason why is because Egypt had peace treaties. Okay, Ramses II had peace treaties. The only people who are really sort of equipped to attack Egypt were the Hittites. And the Hittites had a peace treaty with Egypt by the 25th regnal year, which happens to be just around the time of the Exodus. So the Hittites are not going to attack Egypt after just signing a peace treaty and exchanging marriage wives. That ain't going to happen. Now, on the other hand, Egypt still had, say, its foot soldiers, and that could still put up quite a resistance against, say, lesser states. Now, with that said, Egypt was attacked, but by the Libyans. And that occurred in the 5th regnal year of Merneptah. And the problem is that Merneptah could not scrape together enough chariots to do a proper counterattack. The Libyans had managed to occupy the Nile Delta for 3 months. It took 3 months for Merneptah to cobble enough chariots together to provide a response. So it is really, really clear that that by the time of King Merneptah, which is only 5 years after the reign of Ramses II, Egypt no longer had enough chariots to defend herself. It probably had enough chariots to go on a minor campaign into, say, Canaan, but not enough chariots to defend itself from, say, a coalition attack. And the Libyan attack was a coalition. It was several chiefs that had banded together to attack the Nile Delta en masse in order to take the food. Okay? So, that should answer that question. So we don't have an attack in Merneptah, or sorry, in Ramses II's lifetime, because he's got treaties. He's got treaties. He has subdued the Libyans in the west. He subdued the Nubians in the south. But after that, his successor, Merneptah, pays a pretty high cost for not having enough chariots. And that is recorded. That is recorded on the Merneptah victory stela and the Great Karnak victory stela as well. So, anyway, thank you for the question. I hope that answered that. Okay, now I think we got another super chat. Okay. Okay, we got a $10 super chat from Moises Salazar. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Pleasure to be here, Dr. Falk. Well, it's a pleasure having you here. It's wonderful that you could join us tonight. This may be a little out of your bailiwick, but can you do a comparison between the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead? Any influence in Jesus Christ? I think that's what you mean by JC. Okay. Yeah, that is out of my bailiwick. I know the Egyptian Book of the Dead quite well. That's because I did a lot of work on it. The Tibetan Book of the Dead I have never read. So, with that said, it's really, really hard for me to compare the Egyptian Book of the Dead with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It is an interesting question. Yeah, absolutely it's an interesting question. But I don't know anything about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, so unfortunately I can't do a comparison. Now, however, I can compare the Book of the Dead with any influence with Jesus Christ, and I don't see any, honestly. I know there are people that try to compare the Osiris myth found in the Book of the Dead with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And they're not similar in any way. They're not similar at all. One of the things about, say, for example, Osiris is he was never resurrected. Okay? He was reanimated and copulated with. It's kind of like Weekend at Bernie's. Weekend at Bernie's. Essentially, Isis and Nephthys find the pieces of the chopped up pieces of Osiris, stitch them all together, reanimate the corpse. Each one in turn does the nasty with the dead Osiris and has a child from it. The problem is that Osiris was still dead. He was still dead. What he was resurrected in the afterlife. And gives the power of apotheosis. Okay, I gotta highlight that comment. Usur is Weekend at Bernie's. I'm dying. Yeah, he is. It's definitely Weekend at Bernie's. And Bernie got lucky too. Post mortem. Yeah, there's more to compare Weekend and Bernie's with the Egyptian Book of the Dead than with, say, the New Testament. I mean, but ultimately, Osiris's resurrection is as king of the underworld. That's his resurrection, and that's his apotheosis. And that's also what makes him sort of the wellspring of say, resurrection energy, is through his power within the underworld as a result of that. So, so yeah, the two cannot be equated with Jesus Christ in any way. But unfortunately, I cannot compare either one with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I don't know it. I have never read it. So, anyway, I hope that gives you at least some resolution to the question, or at least gave you a good laugh. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay, let's see. Lou for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Did the Egyptians ever debate the events that occurred in the Passover throughout history? Depends what you mean by debate. Okay. Now, did they debate the Passover events of the Passover directly throughout history? And the quick answer is, as far as we know, no. Were events like the Passover discussed in Egyptian history? And that's a definite yes. Okay? There are several events that are eerily similar to the Passover, not necessarily the Passover, but say the 9 plagues leading up to the Passover, that seem to have happened more than once in Egyptian history. The blotting out of the sun seems to have happened at least once prior in Egyptian history. The river turning to blood seems to have happened before in Egyptian history. These do seem to be naturalistic events that have occurred more than once in Egyptian history. So while they didn't say necessarily debate it, they did discuss it, and they did mention it. We find this in, say, the prophecy of Nefertiti, the instruction of Ipuwer. So there are, especially Middle Kingdom documents, where we find references to Passover-like events and Exodus-like events, but happening much earlier in the history of Egypt. And these texts usually date to the Middle Kingdom, at the turn of, say, Dynasty 11 into Dynasty 12. Usually the first reign of Dynasty 12 is what they're usually attributed to. And there's really no doubt about that date either, because the language and the references that we find in those texts are clearly Middle Kingdom and early Middle Kingdom. Okay, so I mean, this isn't even say, the end of Dynasty 13. This is like the beginning of Dynasty 12. So we do find the events of the plagues mentioned, and the Egyptians are mentioning them, but the specific ones of the Exodus themselves do not seem to have, the record does not seem to be preserved. Now, let me qualify that too. Our records from the capital of Egypt at that time, Paramses, are exceptionally terrible. Okay? Very, very, we're lucky in the case of the Middle Kingdom, in that we actually have a lot more texts preserved from around the area of the capital of Ichitawe, and in particular the Lahun Papyrus Cache. Some of the Ostraca from Deir el-Medina contain Middle Kingdom texts. But we don't have much in the way of historical records from the reign of Ramses II, except the late Egyptian Miscellanies, but those seem to have been sort of curated for specific purposes, not for as records of history. Those were more or less pedagogical writing samples. Okay. So really, your question is a yes and no kind of question. It's no, they didn't talk about the events that are around the Passover, but they were Passover-like and Exodus-like events that they did talk about. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Angel VWN for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is considered the beginning of the clan and the end of the clan? Okay. Now, we are working on a video on just this topic. We're going to do a Monday release that's going to be all about clans. Okay? Because I think there's a lot of confusion over clans, and it's not something that we are used to in our particular society. But generally speaking, a clan is started when you have, say, a progenitor, do something famous, do something important, and establish a family, a large family. Okay? Now, a clan is defined as essentially 4 living generations. Okay, so your progenitor has kids, they have kids, they have kids. And what happens is over time, the oldest generation dies, the newest generation takes over, or fills in the gap, And the clan leader is appointed down the ranks. Okay? So essentially, as long as that clan leader is still alive to preserve the name of that clan remains alive. And we do see this in, say, places like Scotland and Ireland, where we do have clans that are over 900 years old there. And it seems to be that as long as those families, those families can lose their ancestral holdings and still have integrity as a clan. So when we deal with clan politics, the family can get quite large. But it seems that once, say, that progenitor dies, or the person who succeeds, I should say, ultimately, the last heir of that progenitor dies, so that there's no clear line of succession, then that clan dies. And then new clans sort of form out of that. Okay, so that seems to be... the clans don't just disappear entirely. They sort of break off into new clans. So that seems to be how it works. As I said, we're going to get more into detail on this on the Monday release that we do in the next month on clans. So we're going to go through this in more detail than probably anyone wants to hear, but I think this is an important topic. It's a really, really important topic for understanding the Bible. Because one of the things we have to understand about the Bible is it's an entirely clan-based society. It's not a tribe-based society. It's a clan-based society. So if you don't understand that it's a clan-based society, you can misinterpret a lot of stuff and not even know it. And unfortunately, our English translations don't do us a good service here. Because they often translate clan as family, when it's not a family. It's much, much bigger than that. The concept is bigger than that. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. So to recap, a progenitor starts a clan, a large family that grows to 4 generations and keeps sort of that, maintaining that integrity of generations over the centuries until there's no more successors, and then it splits off into new clans. It's kind of like clans are kind of like amoebas. They split in half when their day's over. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. I don't. Yeah, okay. All right. Linguizambo for $5. Thank you very much for super chat. Hey, Dr. Falk, I just wanted to know your thoughts on the mixed multitude theory of the conquest put forward by Andrew and Killebrew. Okay. I don't know Killebrew's theory on this. I'd have to look this up. But I have my thoughts on the mixed multitude theory. And it really is going to depend what she means by the mixed multitude here. Now, some people are going to take a mixed multitude theory to think that this is sort of the peaceful infiltration theory, where you have, say, maybe Levites or wandering sojourners that sort of peacefully infiltrate and they pick up the mixed multitude from, say, the local Canaanites. Okay? I don't think that's the mixed multitude. It's... The Exodus makes it sort of clear... And I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying that's Killebrew's view, because I don't know what Killebrew's view is, but I just want to make sure that I'm covering other bases here as well. I do think that the mixed multitude is, basically the result of the cosmopolitanism that we find at Avaris. And Avaris was a very cosmopolitan city. We know from the archaeology there that not only Egyptians lived there, but Nubians lived there. We also, because there was a garrison of Nubian soldiers that was stationed there. Magi would have been there because Magi were placed all over Egypt to act as policemen and community leaders. Libyans would have been there because that was part of the ethnic groups that wandered in off of the Sahara at the end of the Neolithic wet period. So we got this large melting pot, this sort of mishmash of various ethnicities in Egypt in that particular part of the Nile Delta at that particular time. So it's really not inconceivable that when the Israelites are coming out of Egypt, they're leaving with a bunch of different people, a bunch of different ethnicities. Egyptians, Magi, Nubians, Libyans, other Semites, Amorites, because the Hyksos were Amorites. So there's a large, wide body of group that are coming out with the sons of Jacob to form this new nation. And this is why I also say, too, that we really can't talk about the Israelites living in Egypt. They were the sons of Israel, but they weren't the Israelites. The Israelites are really formed in the Sinai Peninsula as a result of this mixed multitude coming out of Egypt and sort of integrating itself with the 12 tribes. So, anyway, I wish I could say more about her theory, but that's how I understand the mixed multitude, even if it's not the same as the mixed multitude theory. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, let's see here. Converse contender for $1.99. Good to see you tonight, Will. Nice to have you here. Okay, Folks Live. I got behind the scenes of the Old Testament. Great. Closed book. Well, it was interesting to work on that project. There was a little bit of a background story there to my contribution to that book. I wrote the chapter on the Egyptian sojourn and Exodus. And at the time, when they enlisted me on that project, they said to me that I could write anything I want on the Exodus. And they told that to all the authors, that we didn't want to interfere with your scholarly point of view. And I said, okay, fantastic. So I wrote a chapter completely about the late Exodus date and the late Exodus cultural context and everything from the late Exodus period, because that's where all the evidence is. And I got from the editors, oh no, you can't write about that. Anything but that. I said, but it's the truth. I said, and they said, yeah, we know it's the truth, but you can't tell them that. Yeah, they weren't so. They said, oh, tone it down. You can still say you were from the late Exodus day, but tone it down a lot. We don't want to alienate any of our readership. So yeah, there was a lot of fear that my chapter would alienate all the more conservative Christian readers. So so yeah, So there was a little bit of background of that to my contribution to that book, but that's okay because did get to speak my piece eventually when I published my own book. But yeah, it's still a great book though, and it's a great resource, and I highly recommend it. It's a fabulous book. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. You got a little anecdote there, and I'm glad you could be with us tonight. Okay, Tom Wamchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Does Moses' fear being God's spokesman imply that he had a speech impediment? Was this partly why God chose him? Strength and weakness. Love your book. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate the people who have bought my book and have really taken the time to pour through it. That was really a labor of love. So it warms my heart that anyone read it and appreciated it. So your questions. Two questions. Does Moses fear being God's spokesman imply he had a speech impediment? Well, that's a good question. He does say he's slow of speech, so there's some sort of indication that he either had a speech impediment or he wasn't quick thinking. That's another possibility too. So it might have been he might have had a speech impediment, or that he couldn't formulate his thoughts fast enough to be a fluent speaker. So, either one of those is a possibility. There was a problem. There does seem to have been a problem. And a problem that did affect his self-confidence in being able to go to the people and act as God's spokesman. Now, your second question, was this partly why God chose him, strength and weakness? It could have been. Yeah, that's a possibility. It's also possible, too, that, God chose him because he would have done what he was told. At least most of the time. Moses did approach the burning bush. He had a certain amount of courage here. He may have been afraid of how he looked because of his speech issues, but he had enough courage and enough zeal that he could actually, stand up to Pharaoh as an intermediary. But also, too, God chose Moses because one of the things we have to be aware of when we talk about, say, Moses, is that, and frankly any biblical writer, is God prepares them from the very beginning. God chooses the path people take to, this is what we call in theology the inspiration of the texts. Divine inspiration. It's not just that people get the words from God to write down. I mean, it's not Zappo. He's got the words and he's writing them down like he's automatic writing like in some weird UFO cult. That's not what's meant by inspiration. Inspiration means that God has prepared the person with every life experience, whether it's being raised in, say, the royal school of the king, to be able to read Egyptian, to be able to read Akkadian, to know the local Semitic dialect. Whether it's the fact that he was the adopted son of a daughter of a king, that's part of it. He was exiled, or ran away, and became a shepherd for 40 years. That's going to influence how he does things. Everyone's life experiences, what they read, who they interacted with, who their influences, all of that plays into inspiration. So that when Moses or any prophet went to write down the actual text, all of that life experience and knowledge and everything about that person has been channeled to that end. So we can look at a guy like Moses and we can say God chose him for a dozen reasons. Dozen reasons. Yes, strength and weakness is one of those reasons. But so also is the fact that he was put in a basket among the reeds for Pharaoh's daughter to find. So is the fact that when he grew up, he went and checked out his brothers and then slew an Egyptian. Now, God didn't cause him to do that, to kill an Egyptian. But God knew he would do that and would redeem that for good, even though it was Moses doing evil. So there's a lot going on here, and this is one of the things we have to realize with inspiration is it's not one thing. It's this sort of all these different things happening throughout a person's lifetime. Who did he meet? He met the king. As the son of a daughter of a king, he had the right to have an audience before the king. That obviously also played into it also. So there's a lot here going on. So we can't restrict it to one reason, but definitely strength and weakness is a reason. Definitely. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answers your question. Very much appreciate it. Okay, Moises Salazar for $10. Thank you very much for another generous super chat. Why is the Lex Talion law so misrepresented? I mean, I was in my 40s when a YouTube video of Christine Hayes clarified that for me. Even the word retaliation for Talion means vengeance. Okay. Well, it is misunderstood, yeah. But part of the reason it is misunderstood is because Lex Talion comes out of clan politics. Okay? And we have to really understand that in the ancient Near East, yes, it does mean retribution, but there's also a limit here to retribution. Prior to the law, to Lex Talion, the law of retribution, retribution could be exceptionally severe. Okay? It escalated. I mean, it escalated way out of control. Interclan warfare was a really messy business. We see examples of this. All over, the ancient Near East. You poke out somebody's eye, and he comes back and he kills you and your entire family. That was clan warfare. Now, generally, in order to prevent escalation, some tribes did develop Lex Talion to limit how much that could escalate. Okay? So the whole idea of this here was really to formalize that within Israelite culture to say, okay, it's an eye for an eye. But it's not an eye for an eye plus a hand. It's not tooth for a tooth plus your entire extended family. Okay? And interclan warfare got that bad. It really did get that bad. Now, there are some places where Lex Talion in traditional interclan warfare was ignored. One of the places we find this in that we see this in the book of Genesis is the rape of Dinah. Okay, where Dinah, daughter of Jacob, is the R word, and the intent of the essentially of the Hivites is to marry the daughter Dinah, and then kill all the Israelites and take their stuff. Benjamin, was a hothead, murderous man. But he also assessed the situation right from a clan warfare perspective, which is he anticipated that's what they were going to do. This is when he comes back and, he wipes them all out. And we see this actually happening in Bedouin, in cases where Bedouins, where a member of one clan will, rape a woman from another clan, and then the clan of the victimized woman goes back and wipes out the entire clan, just wipes them off the map, and that is an intentional escalation, because that scene is so serious. And the reason why that scene is so serious in clan politics is because if a woman can't go out, leave the confines of the clan safety perimeter to go out and do, hunting, gathering, or chores, it puts the whole clan at risk. So Lex Talon was really there to sort of limit how much vengeance could be done. It really was a hard limit, and it was actually a vast improvement over interclan warfare. Just a vast improvement. It saved a lot of lives. It actually saved more lives than it took, because it put a hard limitation on justice. Okay. If you killed somebody, you forfeit your life, not the life of you and your entire family. It also preserved clan structures. And as the Israelites were going into the Promised Land, that preservation of clan structure is going to be imperative to maintaining the inheritance and the boundary stones over generations, centuries, even millennia. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. There's a lot in that. There's a lot going on there. But I hope I brought a little light to that. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. The Sauce with a very, very generous $20 super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Dr. Falk, I've recently heard that the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for less than 400 years. I would agree. Something like 215 years based on Moses and genealogy and Galatians 3:17. 430 years. Thoughts? Thank you. Okay. There is a problem with the 215 years too. Okay. We can kind of see that. First of all, I don't think there's any doubt that they were the Israelites, the sons of Jacob, were in Egypt less than 400 years. We know this from say, Exodus 6, that the maximum amount of time that the Israelites could have been in Egypt was 350 years. Okay? So that's the maximum time. 215 years seems to be more of a minimum time. So what we have here is a range. We don't know exactly how long, but it does seem to be between 215 and 350 years. One of the reasons why it's the 215 years is problematic all on its own is it depends upon the dating of the patriarch of the promise of Galatians 3:17 according to the first promise given to Abraham. And the problem is the text is not specific on which promise starts the clock. First promise, second promise. The problem with the second promise is we don't know exactly when that started. Okay? So there's some wiggle room in some of these calculations. And I think we have to, when we look at this, we have to really sort of take that um, um, and and really sort of be very, very critical as to what are limited in scope here. So I think the 250 years is a absolute minimum it can be, and 350 is the maximum. And frankly, you look at a lot of, say, authors who've written on this, and they'll basically, most of them will say, yeah, the 215, that's the minimum, but it's not the maximum. Now, I lean more towards, say, closer to 350 years myself. I think that works better with the data. I think that's, but it doesn't have to be exactly 350 either. It could be like 340, 330, even 300 years, and still it would all work out. So I think we have to be very cautious here about how that we don't overread the text, or that we read it with certain interpretations, historical interpretations in mind. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate the question. I hope that answered the question. Converse contender for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, that's hilarious. Thanks for the backstory. Well, you're most welcome. Unfortunately, people ask me sometimes if I'm going to write a book on the Exodus. And I often have to tell them it's very hard for me to write a book on the Exodus, because publishers really don't want to touch that. They're fine picking up a book on publishing a book on, say, the early Exodus date, but the late date theory is still very controversial in Christian circles. Not so much among scholars or, say, more liberal or even evangelical Christians, but definitely amongst those who are, say, highly conservative or fundamentalists. It's an exceptionally controversial. I sometimes say that, it's easier to deny the Trinity. It's easier to deny the Trinity in Christian circles than it is to deny the early Exodus date. You're less likely to become a pariah denying the Trinity than you are denying the early Exodus date. A couple days ago, I did a Q&A on Inspiring Philosophy's channel. Inspiring Philosophy and I worked on together on his new Exodus Rediscovered video. And we took a Q&A after. And I did my standard line where, I affirm the Bible. I affirm the biblical text in its proper context. A lot of people really were upset with that. A lot of people were really, really upset. The people were accusing me of denying the Bible. Denying the ancient authors and what they said, when I did nothing of the sort. But if you go against a certain tradition, people are going to get upset. This is one of the reasons too why, for example, there's some text, like, for example, in the Bible, English translations of the Bible. There are times that translators will use traditional translations of certain texts, knowing it's wrong, knowing it's an incorrect translation, just because if they translated it correctly, it would cause such a furor that the translational committee would never hear the end of it. This is why we still find the translation Red Sea in English translations. That's not a translation of Yam Suf. That's a translation of the Septuagint, but it's not a translation of the Pentateuch, the Torah. At least not from the Hebrew. It's why we find, for example, when it talks about the text talks about the Ark of the Covenant, it talks about the lid being mercy seat. The word is lid, but if a translator actually translated that as lid, not mercy seat, he just would not hear the end of it. So there's a limited tolerance to change for the sake of accuracy. Change comes slow in Christian circles, and people do have to sacrifice to advance that change. So anyway, I'm glad you enjoyed the story. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's been great having you here tonight. Okay. Moises Salazar for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. About Akhenaten exile in Sinai, what was the cause? Akhenaten was never exiled in Sinai. Also, if Sinai were to be excavated thoroughly, what would be fine? Please expand. Okay. There is a theory that floats out there, and I do very much appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. There is a theory out there that Akhenaten was exiled into Sinai, and that he's actually Moses, and that he comes back and rescues the people out of Egypt. Well, the problem is nobody accepts that. It's a fringe theory. It has no basis in fact. The fact is that there's several reasons why this is wrong. First of all, the capital city of Akhenaten was at Amarna, Tel El Amarna. The Egyptians called it Akhetaten. It is a long, long ways from Goshen. So you couldn't keep a consistent biblical text if you accept that Akhenaten was Moses. We also don't have any evidence that Akhenaten ever went to Sinai, except maybe really early on in his reign. It looks like Akhenaten did a military campaign into Canaan. That happened in the first couple of years of his reign. So he does do a military campaign in the first couple of years of his reign, but he doesn't. He's not exiled. Year 6. Akhenaten establishes his capital at Tel El Amarna, and then he reigns there for the next 9 years, roughly. We also have evidence that he actually died and was mummified and buried in Egypt. So it's really not a viable theory to think that Akhenaten is Moses, or that he was even exiled in the Sinai. He is, in all likelihood. In fact, most scholars are now 99% sure that the body buried in the coffin found in KV-55 is Akhenaten. Okay, genetic tests, basically have shown that. That there's a strong, familial relationship here between him, King Tut, Amenhotep III, and what sometimes is regarded as Tut's mother. The unknown lady, she's called. So, there's really at this point, because of the genetic testing, no doubt that is no reasonable doubt that is anyone other than Akhenaten. Okay. Now, your second question. Also, if the Sinai were excavated thoroughly, what would we find? Well, we wouldn't know what we find. Now, there have been a few excavations done in the Sinai. There was a Serbet al-Qadam has been excavated. We found there a temple of Hathor, with perhaps the only bark relief found outside of Egypt. It also happens to be Middle Kingdom bark relief too, which is also really interesting as well. We have found slag heaps out there, so their excavations to Cerbite Al-Qadam was not just for turquoise, it does seem to be for manufacturing bronze. There's also a turquoise operation on the coast. It was more of a processing place than it was actually a mining place. Who is it now that Greg Mumford, excavated that place. That particular site goes back to the Old Kingdom. So we do know that there are little seasonal towns in the Sinai that were seasonally occupied for the purposes of various mining operations. What we find beyond those is anyone's guess. Nobody has done a systematic site survey of the entire Sinai. There were some Bedouin sites that have been occupied for many centuries, where we find stone tools, campfires, animal remains. But the finds tend to be pretty sparse. Also along the North Sinai, we do find fortresses. Okay, we find them more along, say, the northeastern side of the Sinai. Like we find Charu there, the Lion's Den was there. Invariably, there'd be other fortresses up there as well. So there's actually a whole lot that we could find if more was done in the Sinai, and that would be very, very exciting, especially if we could do more excavations into the central Sinai and, say, along the eastern, the northeastern portion of the Sinai. I think there'd be some much more interesting stuff there to be found. But a lot's going to have to change before that becomes viable again. Right now, the Sinai is a hotbed of insurgency activity from the Muslim Brotherhood. People do die going to the Sinai. It's not safe. So unfortunately, we're all sort of waiting for the Sinai to become safe again so that we can go back and do some excavating, because that would be really wonderful and it would be really, really helpful. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I hope that answered your questions. All right, and that seems to be the end of the super chats, so we can get back to some non-super chats. Okay. I'm going to take this one here. Can you discuss your agreement and disagreement with Michael Heiser with regard to his counsel of God interpretation on the Old Testament? I'm not going to go into that too much in detail because I think that almost requires its own video. But I will say this. I partially agree with him. Especially when it comes to, say, the Iron Age literature. My disagreement tends to be more along the lines of, say, he's got a great interpretation, and when you got a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. So I think things like Genesis, Deuteronomy 32, Exodus 12, I think when you start viewing that through a Council of God's lens, you create an anachronism that we don't necessarily find good evidence for in the Late Bronze Age. We find excellent evidence for it in the Iron Age. This is why I agree with him for the Book of Job. This is why I agree with him mostly for Psalm 82. Not completely for Psalm 82, mostly for Psalm 82. Like, for example, I don't see any problem with Psalm 82 referring to both human judges and to, say, the Divine Council. I don't see a problem with doing that. Heiser will just say taken exclusively Council of Gods reading for Psalm 82. I don't think, though, that you can say that Psalm 82 is strictly about the Council of Gods, although it is a reference to it. So that's about all I will say on that, which is I think that that there's reason to agree with his point of view, and he has some very clever views. I have to hand it to him. The guy is an exceptionally creative exegete. I just don't go as far as he does on a lot of these. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, I'll take FMN's question. Did Jonah really die in the belly of the fish and go to Sheol, or was he still alive during the 3 days? He was dead as a nail. Dead as a door knocker. We read in Jonah chapter 2 where he goes underneath the mountains into the waters. And this is not in the whale. Under the mountains. Now, under the mountains is Sheol. That's Sheol. So he's in Sheol. So he's dead in the fish. This is why the sign of Jonah is so important to Jesus Christ and the resurrection. Something wrong?
Yeah, you did miss it.
I did miss what?
A super chat.
Okay, it sounds like I missed the super chat, so let me finish up this question. I'll go back and I'll get the super chat. Okay, now, so yes, he's alive once he's been spit out. So he's basically a dead body is spit up on the shore, and he's raised. This is why, as I said, this is such a powerful symbol for the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is absolutely dead in the tomb 3 days, in the belly of the earth. And then on the 3rd day, he rises on the grave and literally walks out of the tomb, like Jonah is purged from the belly of the fish. So absolutely, Jonah is really, really dead. And he's really, really dead 3 days. And frankly, it makes a lot more sense of the text. It also makes more common sense, too, insofar as that nobody can stay alive 3 days in the belly of a fish. You know, when I was in Sunday school as a kid, yeah, it's hard to imagine me in a Sunday school as a child. But I still remember, you know, these Sunday school materials, ridiculous Sunday school materials from David C. Cook, who is actually the largest producers of Sunday school materials in North America. And they would show Jonah sitting in the belly of the whale with a chair, table, propane lamp.
That's Pinocchio. Not
My wife says that's Pinocchio, not the Bible. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. You know, no wonder people go to college and go, wait, no, what's in my head really doesn't actually make sense. Well, that's because what you've been shown isn't accurate to the text. If we taught people according to what the text actually says, we'd have to do a whole lot less cleanup after. It just makes a mess. So, yes, absolutely, Jonah died in the belly of the whale. The text is clear. He went to Sheol. And it's clear that when the whale spit him up, he was revivificated, brought back to life. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a great question. Now, I have been told about a lost super chat. Let's find out what that lost super chat is. Which one is it, hun?
here. It's above.
Oh, the Anunnaki. Okay, I see it.
Yeah.
Let me see if it came up on my my
Right, no
Twidget.
numbers contenders.
Nope, it did not get it, so I have to start and restart this. Okay, let's hope it draws it in this time. We apologize for the lost super chat. Let's make sure we have it now. It does happen, and okay. All right, unfortunately, it did not grab it a second time. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to cut and paste this. So this will just take a second. All right, so I'm going to go and I'm going to... Okay, and... All right, this should do it. Oops, not that. There we go. Okay. We had to cut and paste it, but we got it. All right, from Amir Esafra for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I heard someone say Anunnaki. He said Anunnaki is Egyptian, and Egyptian crosses the circle Anak, probably Ankh, because Egyptians believed them for heaven. Okay. Ooh. No, the Anunnaki do not come from Egyptian. Are you just trying to pull my chain? The Anunnaki are found in Mesopotamian myths. Okay, so there's nothing in Egyptian that that resembles the Anunnaki. The closest thing that we find in Egyptian to the Anunnaki is what they would call the primordial gods. But they're not, say, celestial beings that come down. They're more beings that rise up out of the primordial waters. So they're not the same. The Anunnaki is definitely comes out of Mesopotamian literature. Okay. And I'm not a big expert on the Anunnaki, so I don't want to say too much. But we don't find anything comparable in Egyptian myth, at least as far as I know. Now, as far as the Egyptian cross with the circle is Anak, and I'm kind of thinking here what they're doing here is trying to do wordplay with Anunnaki. The word in Egyptian for the cross with the circle in it, which is actually a sandal. It's actually the strap of a sandal. If you think about it, your ankle, your foot slips through the circle, and the sort of the long piece of the cross is supposed to go between your big toe and your second toe. So it's a sandal strap. Why they chose that for a symbol of life, who knows? But that's what the Egyptians chose as a circle of life, as their symbol of life. But the word here is Ankh. Okay, it's sort of the vulture. It's not the vulture. Sorry, the iron and noon and a round H. So it's not the same as Anunnaki. Now, verbs or vowels are negotiable. But that round H is not something that converts easily to a K. And it does not convert easily to an Akkadian K. That's probably even more important. So there is an etymological problem here that's going to be very, very difficult to overcome. So I mean, it's not connected. I think there is difficulties here. And I don't think this holds much water. But besides the reason that we don't find them in Egyptian culture. To draw as sort of an Egyptian parallel here, this almost sounds like something that I once heard out of, say, what was it now? There was a UFO conference I once listened to where, yeah, I listened to some weird stuff. But at that UFO conference, they were talking about the Anunnaki being gods from heaven, and they were trying to make weird sort of connections, like to Ankhs and to Egyptian winged deities and all that. And it just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. Somebody who's actually done some actually decent work debunking this stuff is actually Michael Heiser. Because he's really into UFO conventions and UFO cults. For him, it's like a guilty pleasure. But he debunks this just by going to the primary source texts, and he makes it clear that the primary source texts are saying something completely different than what these, say, UFO advocates are proposing. So, but just from my limited knowledge of the Anunnaki, I can tell you it doesn't come from Egyptian. And it is in no way related to the Egyptian word for Ankh, the circle cross. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Let's see here. And whoa. All right, I'll take this one first, this comment first, because I actually kind of think it's kind of interesting. Kenneth Vaughn says, I grew up into UFOlogy. I had a strange family. We took a family trip to Roswell one time.
Cool.
I have known people who have seen UFOs. People I trust and are credible. None of them are the ones that have related to me experiences of UFOs. Have had abductions or anything sort of close encounters of that kind. They none of that stuff. But they did see stuff in the sky that is not how normal satellites or aerial phenomenon behave. So I'm not quick to dismiss it. But they're not necessarily they're not necessarily aliens or extraterrestrial beings either, unless you want to consider, say, spiritual beings to be extraterrestrial. And some people do, but I don't quite go that far. Space aliens is just no. I'm not quite buying the whole space alien thing. But I am open to the idea that there's a real phenomena out there. I have known, as I say, enough credible people to basically whose testimony I do extremely accept on this. And there was a recent paper in the Senate, U.S. Senate, talking about UFOs. And there was something like there was a redacted version that was released to the public just recently, and what they said was I think it was 119 sightings that were done by Navy, Army, Air Force personnel. Only one could be attributed to natural causes. In all the other cases, they don't know. And I think this is one of the reasons why I say, for example, the U.S. government, in fact, every government in the world, doesn't actually acknowledge UFOs, which is because it's embarrassing to say, I don't know. I'm comfortable with saying I don't know. Governments aren't. That's a security concern. If you say you don't know, that means you're not in control of your airspace and the tactical situation. Governments don't like admitting that. So I think there's real warrant to saying that the phenomena is real, but what it actually is anyone's guess. So anyway, a very interesting question. So let's see more. Let's see, go to more non-super chats here. Let's see. Don't know what I mean by that. Okay, DDLV, I'm not sure what you actually mean by this question, but I'm going to read it out loud anyway. What are your feelings on the book of Revelation? And it's Revelation singular, not Revelation plural. Although it's a very common mistake to make that. And why they say we didn't have it in the Bible until the 19th century. Thank you. Okay. There's... it's probably an overstatement to say we didn't have it in the Bible until the 19th century. But there was a translational issue that we did not have a good, solid Greek edition of it until the 19th century. And it's not that a Greek edition didn't exist. Some of this comes out of a backstory concerning the King James Version. Now, the King James Version was when the New Testament of the King James Version was translated. It was translated by 5 Byzantine overlapping texts. Missing from these texts was the Book of Revelation. Okay? It only had a fragment, like the first 2 chapters of the Book of Revelation. The rest of the book actually had to be back translated from the Vulgate into Greek. And then the King James Version, the English version, was then translated from that back translated version of the Greek. Okay? And this is what we find in, say, Stephanus' 3rd edition, or Erasmus' edition, is that back translation from the Latin. So what we have for the book, most of the Book of Revelation, until the 19th century, was a Greek version that had been that was translated into a Latin version, which was translated into a Greek version, which was translated into an English version. So now, despite all that, they did a pretty decent job. With the 19th century, we have a lot more Greek manuscripts that are now available. I mean, dozens more. We have, say, the Codex Sinaiticus. We have Codex Alexandrinus. You know, we got these various codexes now that do include copies of the Book of Revelation. And from that, we can now make a good source critical text and the Book of Revelation, you know. So it isn't actually true we never had the Book of Revelation. We had it in Latin. We had it in Latin going all the way back since Jerome. We just never had a Greek edition until the 19th century. But we still had it. And when we compare, say, what the translators of the Latin into the Greek did for Revelation and what the source critical text turned out to be, they didn't do that bad a job. They didn't do that bad a job at all. Not perfect, but a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation is never going to be perfect. It's just that's just a problem. I mean, there's an artist on YouTube who basically does Google Translates of various songs, And the way the words are done is they're basically translated between multiple languages until they're not even recognizable. And there's one particularly funny one where the theme from, say, the anime movie Joseph is put through this, and it comes out being a Sith Lord, who's the translation ultimately resolves it to. So, it is hysterically funny, but it also shows you the problem with doing multiple translations like this. So, we did have it, we just had it in Latin. So, it was an interesting question. Okay. Now, didn't I see one?
John Fabic, $9.99.
John Fabic, $9.99. Okay.
Right, yellow one.
Okay, I found it. Okay, John Fabic for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. You mentioned in previous videos you have identified Terra with a historical figure. What was his ethnicity, language, and which gods did he worship? Do we also find references to Abram or his other sons? Okay, the person in question is Terra of Urkesh. And we find him mentioned several times as the ruler of the city of Urkesh in northern Mesopotamia. His ethnicity is a little unsure. We're not quite sure of his ethnicity, but he is Mesopotamian. He is Mesopotamian. He's possibly Amorite. He was trying to keep Urkesh under sort of the hegemony of the Kingdom of Mari. But his own people did not basically want that and kicked him out. So we do have evidence of Terra of Urkesh leaving Urkesh and becoming a sojourner in northern Syria. Haran, in other words. We do have extra biblical reference to one of Urkesh's sons that died while at Urkesh, possibly as a result of riots. So, if this could be the third son of Terah that did not survive. So we don't have a reference to Abraham, and we don't have a reference to that other son by name, but other sons of Terah of Urkesh are mentioned by reference. So I think it's actually a pretty good identification. Now, what is now that there is some question about Terra of Urkesh and what we find in the Bible, Kashdim, and that's some very interesting thing right there. Is what we might have in there is a basically in some places in the Bible, and in some places in especially in the Hebrew text, we have no spaces. So sometimes later writers, especially the Masoretes, when they start breaking up the Hebrew text into words with spaces in between them, they don't always put the space in the right place. And because they don't always put the space in the right place, they sometimes have to say, well, this doesn't make sense, so we're going to change the text in the Masoretic text slightly. Okay, that happens. We do have some examples of this. An excellent book on this is actually Paul Lawrence's book, Egg Whites or Turnips, which talks about the various text issues of Bible translations. It's an excellent book. It's a small book. It's really inexpensive, but an excellent book on this. So what I think is happening, say, with Ur-Kasdim, or Ur of the Chaldees, is it's putting the space in the wrong place. So the Masoretes put a space between Ur and Kesh. So you now have, well, what's Kesh? Keshdim, which is Chaldean, when it should have probably been Ur-Kesh to begin with. So I think there's very, very strong evidence that that space should not have been there. So the language that he would have used would have been Akkadian. We do find from the Mari texts that most of the correspondence of that period was done in Akkadian. Which gods did he worship? I believe he worshipped a lunar deity from the biblical texts. I think that deity was a lunar deity called Sin, but do not quote me on this. I'd have to look that up. But he does seem to have been a worshipper of lunar deities, as far as I can tell. The Mesopotamians did have a bunch of deities that were based upon, say, astronomical phenomena, or astrological phenomena. So it's likely that he worshipped one of those. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I'm glad we found it. Okay. Let's see here. What else? RG Strategy. I wonder if Jonah had AC in there. Laugh out loud. Probably not. I think it was very humid. He could have used some AC and a good oxygen pump, but... let's see what else you have here. Purple Pill Philosophy. Good to see you here tonight. Ancient Egypt in the Bible. Why do you suppose Digital Hammurabi is so afraid to debate you? I think he's very, very comfortable punching down. That's what I think. And I'm not going to press it with him. He's so far been fine to sort of bury the hatchet. I'm fine to bury the hatchet, and but I do think when he does debate these topics, he tends to pick, people who are not quite up to his caliber. Guys that are sort of blatantly incompetent in the subject matter being discussed, such as his last debate. I'll let you look up who that is. But it was very, very clear that his opponents were not showing competence in a proficient way. They were trying to be debaters, but to actually discuss topics such as the Egyptian material for the Exodus, you really have to have a good handle on both the Bible and the Egyptological material. His opponents don't have competency in either. He has competency in the Bible, but he knows the problem when we start talking about the Exodus is you really need competency in both to actually to go toe-to-toe with someone. So he is never... we've talked privately once, and he knows he doesn't want to do that debate. And frankly, I'm not a debater either. So, I don't particularly care to do debates. I leave that to other people. I kind of think that debates are a waste of time. I really do. I'd rather make new content and new videos than do pointless debates that really aren't going to convince anyone and are not going to really move the goalpost. Yeah, they might serve as hedge protection, but I'm kind of interested in advancing the field of knowledge, not just doing hedge protection for the home team. So I will leave it up to you to do any further speculation on why he's reticent. So anyway, but thank you for the question. Okay, let's see what else here. Brick Creation. Is Jebel Musa Mount Sinai that Moses went to? Okay. That's a good question. We don't know. Okay? We don't know. Now, I take it you're talking about the Jebel Musa that is in the interior of the Sinai Peninsula. There's a couple other mountains outside of that, like in the Saudi Arabia Peninsula, that are also called Jebel Musa informally, but that's not their real name. But the one Jebel Musa that's in the Sinai is actually very, very close to St. Catherine's. It's very, very difficult to be sure which mountain in that range was the original Mount Sinai. We've got a lot of evidence, from the topographical information that we're given to rule out any sort of candidate for Mount Sinai outside of the Sinai Peninsula.
Is that deliberate?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, that was deliberate. Oh, it's back on. Okay, I can turn it off. Yeah. All right. And but the problem is there's about a dozen candidates inside of the Sinai Peninsula itself that could possibly be Mount Sinai. The fact is we just don't know. Nobody has done a proper archaeological excavation of the region. It's a huge amount of territory. It's an absolutely massive amount of territory to try to make any sort of coherent archaeological sense of. So, yeah, absolutely. Jebel Musa in the Sinai Peninsula is a candidate. It is possibly the mountain that Moses went to. Can we know for sure? Not at this present time. So, anyway, great question. Very much appreciate that. Okay, let's see what else we got here. RG Strategy says the younger lady. I think yes, that is the wife, that woman that has been identified as King Tutankhamun's mother. I think she was found. She was found in, if I'm correct, I think she was found in one of the caches, one of the mummy caches. I think it was DB 320, Daryl Bakri 320. That her body was found in, but I'm not sure. We found a lot of these unidentified mummies in some of these mummy caches, but she has been identified by DNA profiling to be the mother of King Tut. So we're really pretty sure of that. And likewise, we are pretty sure that the male found in the coffin in KV-55 was Akhenaten. Now, the open question about that coffin in KV-55 is it wasn't a male's coffin. That's the strange bit. It was definitely the coffin of a woman. Whose coffin was Akhenaten buried in? We don't know. My guess is it was probably Nefertiti's coffin. So, you look at, say, the statuary of Nefertiti, you look at what remains of that coffin, I think it's clear that was the coffin of Nefertiti that Akhenaten got buried in. And I've got reasons for saying that. I think it's more than just sterile conjecture. I think that there was... I think what happened was Akhenaten's funerary assemblage was so elaborate, he didn't get done on time. He just didn't. By the time he was dead, it wasn't ready. So he got buried in the one royal assemblage that was ready, which happened to be Nefertiti's. And I think the inheritor of that Amarna burial was King Tut. I think he lived long enough to see it completed. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Any more questions coming in from the bottom here? I'll take this one from Tony G. Why did war break out in heaven? This refers to the war in the Book of Revelation. Was it Lucifer's rejection of God's plan of salvation? Now, this is interesting. It's interesting for a few reasons. We don't know exactly why war broke out in heaven. We're told it's a rebellion. Okay. The text does seem to imply that a third of the angels or a third of the heavenly host, some of those are angels, some of them aren't, were involved. Was it Lucifer's rejection of God's plan of salvation? We're not exactly sure. I tend to lean more along the lines that Lucifer had his own reasons for rejecting it that had nothing to do with God's plan of salvation. Okay. I think he was the cherub that was in the garden. I think he was one of the throne cherubs. I think he sat in and listened to the plans of God as God, talked from the throne. But God didn't reveal the whole plan. And basically, pride. Pride took Lucifer down. So, I think it was ultimately a condition of the heart that led to that rebellion, not necessarily what God was planning to do. And we get that from, say, Ezekiel 28, where, Ezekiel 28 goes into what the cherub were thinking and what they were doing. And if you want more information on this, you can see my video on from the spiritual world, spirit world cherubim, and you'll get more information on this. So, anyway, good question. Thank you very much for that question. Someone the person asks, how much of a straw man is it to call the Israelites undeveloped, ignorant, Bronze Age goat herders? Well, it is poisoning the well.
I don't know if it's a straw man.
I don't think it's a straw man. It is a little bit of a poisoned well. They were goat herders. Okay. They were in the Bronze Age. Being Asiatic Semites, yeah, they were definitely goat herders in the Bronze Age. Underdeveloped, okay, now that sort of crosses the line here. We are starting to develop a more sophisticated picture of what Asiatic Semites were capable of. We do know they had their own culture. We see from the tomb of Beni Hassan in the Middle Kingdom where some Levantine Semites are traveling into Egypt. Okay, they're traveling into Egypt to, feed their herds and to do mining operations. Okay, so they had some skills when they came in. They were able to do mining. One of those scenes is they present documents to the nomarch, and basically saying, hey, these are our credentials coming in. Okay, if they're so underdeveloped and ignorant, what are they doing presenting documents? Okay, that's a. I mean, you need to write to have documents, or a petition, or whatever. You still have to have some form of literacy to do that. And the Middle Kingdom, you know, that's Bronze Age, but that's not late Bronze Age. We're talking the Middle Bronze at that point. We also know from, say, Mara that alphabetic writing actually goes now all the way back to at least 2350 BC. So that's early Bronze Age. So I'm expecting that as time progresses, we're going to find even more early alphabetic inscriptions of Semitic writing. We do know that the preservation of these inscriptions is very rare. I would love to get my hands on some photographs of, say, plaster samples or ostraca from some of these excavations, because I have some special techniques that I use to reveal very, very hard to read inscriptions. Unfortunately, a lot of excavators are not are very, very reticent to share that those photographs and information with people outside of their excavations, because they want to be the ones that discover it first. A little bit of professional jealousy there, but you deal with what you deal with. But I think we're going to find in the future a lot more text coming out, because I've been able to do some, say, rudimentary wall paintings, and they basically expose readings that people haven't seen before. So there's a lot of really new technology that I think is going to reveal some new Semitic texts, and I think it's just a matter of time. It's clear that by this point that the evidence shows that those underdeveloped, ignorant Bronze Age goat herders could both read and write. At least some of them could. So, not a straw man, but it's definitely poisoning the well. So anyway, that's my opinion on that. Okay. Chow Yi, what do you think about the upcoming debate between Bart Ehrman and Mike Licona? Frankly, I don't think a lot of it. It's not that I'm just not that interested in it. I probably won't even watch it, to be honest. Ehrman is essentially a New Testament guy. He's basically does a lot of epigraphy of late first century texts. He's an expert on Gnosticism. He has done a lot of work on the development of the Gospels. Like Mike Licona is an apologist. I see this being more heat than light. So my time is so precious. I don't want to waste like 2 hours on something that isn't going to, say, advance my own work in the field. So I probably won't watch it, honestly. But I'm not saying for other people not to watch it. It's just probably not going to be that interesting for me. Okay, I do see another super chat here. From St. Luke for 999. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and he says, I know you said before that the pharaoh who had the children killed was either Ai or Horemheb. If Thebes was still the capital, what was the pharaoh's daughter doing at Avaris? Okay, this is how it works. The pharaoh's daughter is a retrojection. Okay, She wasn't Pharaoh's daughter at the time Moses flees, or at the time the children were killed. Okay? She was the daughter of the governor of Avaris, who later on became the vizier of Lower Egypt, who later on himself became Pharaoh. Okay? So what's happening is, what we have is a sequence of events. Okay? So the Hebrew children are killed during the reign of Ai and Horemheb, and by the reign of Horemheb, he installs his good friend Ramses I as vizier over Lower Egypt, and essentially makes him crown prince at some point. We don't know exactly when, but he does become crown prince. So then the daughter of Ramses I, not actually being royalty yet. She's not royalty yet, because she's not technically the daughter of a king. She's a daughter of a governor. Daughters of the governor have the right to adopt whoever they want. Daughters of a king don't have that right. So what happens is, she becomes, she's the daughter of a governor. She adopts Moses. Moses is raised in the royal household at the palace at Avaris, which is basically the governor's mansion. That's the mansion for the vizier of Lower Egypt. And he is raised in the house until he goes back, sees his fellows, kills the Egyptian, has to run away during the reign of Horemheb, when Horemheb, Moses skedaddles out of Egypt. Horemheb eventually dies. Then Moses returns with his wife and 2 small kids, and it's at that point it becomes known that his mother was the daughter of a king, which makes him the son of a daughter of a king. So that's how the whole timeline works together. By the reign of Ramses I, it's the capital is still Thebes, but when Moses is returning, when he actually returns, Ramses II has taken the throne, and now you've got the capital moving to Ramses. The capital at that point is no longer at Thebes. And that's what facilitates Moses being able to have that audience with Ramses II. Is he's the son of a daughter of a king, but could be adopted as a son of a daughter of a king, because she was not always the daughter of a king. So there's a little bit of retrospective writing going on there. Moses' mother, who adopted him, is being credited with always having been the daughter of a king, even though at one point she wasn't. Just like Ramses II himself was not always the son of a king or a grandson of a king. We have to recognize that Ramses II was 2 years old when his grandfather Ramses I came to the throne. So Seti I wasn't always the son of a king. Ramses II was not always son of the king. But in texts, Ramses II is always referred to as crown prince and the son of a king until he becomes king himself. So it's just retrospective writing, and it's a very common thing to find in the texts of the period. Very, very common. We even see this in other cases of Egyptian crown princes that go on campaign, who later on become king, and thus retroject it so that he's always portrayed as if he had always been the king, even at a point in time when he wasn't the king. So, again, very, very common in ancient texts. And we find these retrojections even used in the book of Genesis. So, it's there, it's in the text, and it's a literary feature we have to be aware of. if we were to interpret the text properly. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for that super chat. Really appreciate it. Okay, actually, Recreation, good to see you. Hi, Dr. Falk. I heard that you were working on a blog on how prophecy is meant to be interpreted. How's that going? Actually, it wasn't a blog. It's actually a paper, a conference paper that is being published with Whiff and Stock on, say, apocalyptic literature. Now, you can actually go to my academia website, my academia account, and you can download a preliminary version of that paper if you want to go read it for yourself. So it is already available on my academia.edu page, and you can. It has to do with the prophecy of Neferti. So it's there to be. People can read it already, and it should be coming out this year in that bound book from Within Stock. So anyway, great question. Thank you very much, but it's not going to be a blog. It is actually going to be a published paper. Okay. And it's 10 o'clock, 8 after 10 now, so I'll take a couple more questions and then call it a night. Because not every live stream should be 3 hours long. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, we've got some interesting things coming up, by the way, in the next couple months or next couple weeks. We're right now doing writing our scripts for the next 4 videos, and we are going to be wrapping up our So You Want to Go to Bible College series. We've got 2 more episodes of that, but we are going to be doing one on the Egyptian afterlife. We're also going to be doing one on clans and tribes. So that's something to look forward to in the next next few weeks. Nathan, don't. Let's see if we can hit 3 hours this time. I don't think so. Not this time. Come on, Dr. Falk. Let's do a 6-hour live stream. Just kidding. Yeah, not a chance. Yes, the afterlife. Indeed, we are actually doing the Egyptian afterlife. Yeah, this one's going to be fun. This one's going to be fun. I'm actually really looking forward to this. So, yeah, absolutely. Alrighty. So do stay tuned for that. Let's see here. I gotta take this one. RG Strategy said would send a super chat, but having issues with my card. Oh, you can always send me crypto. You know, Bitcoin, XMR, they're all good. See the wallet in the in the description. I'm kidding, of course, but we do accept crypto. I have to admit, doing crypto is a lot of fun. Okay, but getting back to your serious question, not so serious host aside, would What was your favorite artifact found in the tomb of King Tutankhamun and why? Ooh. Ooh. Ooh, that is an interesting question. One of my favorite one of my favorite objects in the tomb of King Tutankhamun is actually what's called the small golden shrine. It's this small. It's about, I'd say it's not that small. About 2.5 feet tall. It's a wood shrine with a sledge covered in gold foil. But one of the most interesting details on this is that it has the sliding silver door bolts. And while that's so meaningful to me personally, is I was able to identify those sliding door bolts as hennas and identified the word for them and was able to relate them to British Museum Papyrus 100054, where it talks about the tomb robbers stealing the hennas off of shrines. So, and replacing, and then the tomb robbers would replace the silver hennas with wood fakes. So it was such a beautiful example of the sliding door bolts that it's one of those things that really sort of always resonated with me. But there's so much fabulous stuff in the Tomb of King Tut. The close second favorite is the daggers. I love the daggers from King Tut. There's one in there of meteoritic iron with a quartz pommel. Beautiful work. Beautiful work. There's also one that's gold. What's so interesting about that one is the craftsmanship on that dagger is just sort of potpourri of many cultures across the Mediterranean. The sheath on that is clearly of Mesopotamian work with the lion motifs, but the handle has reticulation. Now, what's so interesting about reticulation is it's reticulation, or sorry, not reticulation. What's it? Granulation. It's granulation. Granulation is on the handle. Now, what granulation is where you make these really, really super fine gold beads and you solder them onto the handle. And it's really difficult to do. Really difficult to do. I'm saying this as an ex-art jeweler myself. As a former art jeweler, I used to do some crazy stuff, but even that's beyond my skill level. But what it was a specialty of the Etruscans. The Etruscans, we actually find a lot of Etruscan metalwork that had granulation done. And we find this granulation on this dagger of King Tut. So it's got both East and Western craftsmanship working on it at the same time. So it's stuff like that. And one of the things that's very interesting too is the actual blade on that dagger is gold. It is gold, but it also is hard enough to retain an edge, which is very, very interesting because gold. You have to be if it is possible to make gold with a high tensile strength, but it takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of skill to do. So I just marvel at the craftsmanship. I marvel at the metallurgy. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, and it's just an aesthetically beautiful piece. So definitely, that's a piece that's near and dear to my heart. Okay. I will take one last question, and then we're going to call it a night. And I am going to take I'll take. Okay, Heather Newt wants to know. I need to stop thinking about this and actually ask you what the glyphs in your background are from. They are from a mastaba on the Giza Plateau. Okay. I don't remember the name of the mastaba off the top of my head. It is my photograph. I'd have to look it up in one of my logbooks. When I go to Egypt, I do photos and I log every tomb scene photograph I take. Okay. Basically, when you come out, it's one of the satellite mastabas near Khufu's pyramid. Okay. So if you're familiar with the Giza complex, there's where if you the entrance to the Giza pyramid is on the north. Okay, on the eastern side of the pyramid is where the mortuary temple of Khufu would have been. Plus, there's some pyramids of his queens. But if you go past that, you start hitting the mastabas, the fourth dynasty mastabas, and down into a sort of almost a ravine-ish kind of digging down. You would hit the mastaba of Khufu's mother. Well, right beside, on the opposite side of that trench, is a mastaba of one of the viziers, of one of the high officials, and that's the mastaba that this photo is taken from, and it's taken in sort of the entryway. So there's a small flight of steps that down, and then you're greeted with this wall of hieroglyphs, and they're beautiful. You can see on the surface there is slightly reflective. That's desert varnish. It's desert varnish, and we do see that that in certain places in some of these inscriptions where the wind will blow, but doesn't blow to the extent where it actually wears the writing away. You'll get this sort of development of desert varnish over top of, say, the inscriptions, and that's what we see here is in this text here is the stone becomes actually discolored, polished, and even slightly shiny as a result of the desert varnish. So that's what you're seeing here. It's a 4th dynasty mastaba. I can't remember the name of it off the top of the tomb owner off the top of my head. I have to look it up. But it is my photograph, and it was from my I believe it was my 2020 trip to Egypt. So there you go. That's where it's from. It's old Egyptian. It was an amazing tomb. It's not a very big mastaba. It doesn't go in very deep, but you can. It's open to the public. It's open to the public, and you can go see it. They do rotate the mastabas, so it might not be open. Not all mastabas are open all the time. They do rotate them, and this prevents them from prevents wear and tear. So I hope that answers your question. And if you do make a pilgrimage there, highly recommended. Frankly, I actually love the mastabas more than like pyramids. I don't like pyramids. I'm a guy who likes temples. I like temples. I like mastabas. Do not care for pyramids. I'm too old to be really trekking up and down the corridors of pyramids. I mean, they're just ugh, and they smell bad. They're hot. They're cramped. Do not like pyramids one bit. Temples. Oh, I can hang out at temples all day. I mean, I just love temples. So, tour with Dr. Folk. Well, we tried to set up a tour last October, but we just couldn't get enough people. So, yeah, we tried. we tried. The channel is just not big enough to really attract enough people to get a tour company interested. So who knows? Maybe in a few more years, and maybe if we hit that, maybe 100,000 subscribers, once we hit the, we just hit 5,000, which is very, very remarkable for the fact that we've been a channel for less than 2 years. Our two-year mark is in May. So we've actually been very, very floored with how much growth we've had over the last 2 years. But, maybe when we hit that 7,500 mark and we start getting some exponential growth in subscriber base, maybe we can try again. I'm not opposed to trying it again. And especially if I can, talk to the tour company, because they're not happy. They really weren't happy that that they didn't get their quota. And they don't do a tour until they get like a quota. I think they have to have at least like 12 people sign on. But I understand for many people the mask restrictions was just not going to make that trip pleasant. Although I did do it in 2020 with masks, so it could have been done. But anyway, we are looking for as I said, maybe when that point we start getting some exponential growth, we might try again to do another tour in Egypt. And as I said, if we've got people already willing to subscribe, we can then convince them to host it. So that's going to be the last question for the night. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. I want to thank all our subscribers. You guys are the reason why we hit 5,000, and we really, really appreciate you. One of the things we really love about our subscribers is you guys actually watch our videos. A lot of channels have a lot of subscribers, but they don't actually watch our videos or watch their videos. Our subscribers are really engaged. They're a fun group of people. They leave comments, they leave questions, and that helps the algorithm. The algorithm likes it when you guys leave likes, questions. Even if you dislike it, that actually helps the algorithm, believe it or not. It tells YouTube you're engaged. And we know from the statistics that on a per subscriber basis that our subscriber base is heavily engaged and watches our material. And that helps us a lot. It really, really does. I also want to thank our Patreon supporters who are just absolutely, they give of themselves sacrificially to help this channel grow. Our Patreon supporters help pay for new equipment and really support us. And finally, I want to thank everyone who has donated a super chat. You help us keep the lights on. The Patreon supporters give us new equipment, but the super chatters keep the lights on. Suffice it to say that we wouldn't be able to afford to do this as often as we do if it wasn't for you guys. So I want to thank everyone who has supported us just so much. We really, really appreciate it. We don't take it for granted for a moment. Because we understand, how hard things in this economy are to come by. And we understand it, and we appreciate it, and we value every piece of support we get. So with that said, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you very much for your questions. I hope you all guys have a great night, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.